The phone lit up while the shower was running. Not a call, a message. It wasn't mine to see, but it was impossible to ignore. My husband had left his phone on the kitchen counter, face up, careless in the way people get when they believe their secrets are safe. The screen glowed once, then again, buzzing softly against the wood. One line filled the lock screen. Last night shouldn't have ended so early. I'm still thinking about you. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because beneath the message was a name I knew too well. Lauren. Not a coworker, not a stranger, not a number without a face. Lauren was my younger sister. For a second, my mind tried to save me. It offered excuses. A joke, a mistake, a message sent to the wrong person. But my body knew better. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with imagination. The shower kept running, water hitting tile, steam fogging the bathroom mirror. Normal sounds from a normal night that had just ended without asking my permission. I stared at the phone without touching it. I didn't unlock it. I didn't scroll. I didn't need more proof. The message said enough. The familiarity, the confidence, the assumption that there would be another night. I thought about the dinners we'd shared, the holidays, the way Lauren used to sit on our couch, feet tucked under her, asking my husband for advice, laughing too easily at things that weren't funny. I had called it closeness, family. Standing there in my coat, keys still in my hand, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a moment of temptation. It was a pattern, and it hadn't started tonight. I've always been the kind of woman people describe as steady. Not exciting, not dramatic. Steady. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 33 years old, and for the last decade, I've worked as a healthcare compliance analyst. My job is simple in theory and unforgiving in practice. I audit systems. I look for gaps. I trace patterns. I ask the questions no one wants to answer. And I don't stop just because the explanation sounds reasonable. I've been married for 8 years, long enough to settle into routines that feel permanent, long enough to believe that quiet meant safe. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was ordered. Mornings followed schedules, bills were paid on time, arguments were rare, and when they happened, they ended neatly, like files closed and archived. People often told me they admired how calm I stayed under pressure. I took that as a compliment. In my world, calm isn't weakness, it's discipline. At work, I'm trained to distrust surface explanations. A clean report doesn't mean a clean system. A confident answer doesn't mean the truth. When something feels off, I don't confront it emotionally. I observe. I document. I wait for the pattern to reveal itself. That training followed me home long before I realized it. Standing in my kitchen that night, my coat still on, the phone still glowing on the counter, I felt the reflex rise. The instinct to grab it, to unlock it, to scroll until my hands shook and my heart raced fast enough to justify whatever came next. I didn't, because once you've done this long enough, you learn something essential. You don't chase evidence when it presents itself voluntarily. That message wasn't an accident. It wasn't vague. It wasn't harmless. It didn't need context or interpretation. It existed in plain sight, confident and unafraid, the way only something repeated many times can afford to be. In my work, the worst failures never announce themselves loudly. They surface quietly, in overlooked details, in assumptions no one thought to challenge. By the time someone panics, the damage is already complete. I knew that if I unlocked the phone, I would be reacting. And reaction is the fastest way to lose control. So I stood there and let the moment pass without touching anything. I let the silence do its work. I let the evidence sit exactly where it was. When evidence introduces itself, denial becomes a choice. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't need to. Once you've learned how systems fail, you stop looking for confessions. You look for signals. They were everywhere, once I allowed myself to see them. His schedule had started shifting in small, reasonable ways. Late meetings that didn't exist on any agenda. Client dinners that ended too early or too late, depending on the story he needed that day. Explanations delivered smoothly, without hesitation, the way rehearsed truths always are. I noticed how often his phone stayed face down, how quickly he stepped outside to take calls he used to answer in front of me, how he began showering the moment he got home, as if washing something off before speaking. None of it was dramatic. That's what made it effective. Betrayals that last don't announce themselves. They blend. I started paying attention the way I do at work, quietly, without altering my behavior. I didn't accuse. I didn't test him. I didn't change my routines enough to trigger suspicion. I simply watched. Then I opened the shared calendar. We'd synced it years ago for convenience. A practical marriage habit, appointments, trips, reminders. Nothing hidden. Nothing private. At least, that's what I'd believed. A dentist appointment caught my eye. Midweek, late afternoon, slotted neatly between a work call and gym. Harmless on its own, except for the date. The same date Lauren had mentioned she was staying with a friend because her apartment was being treated for mold. She'd laughed it off when she told me, made a joke about sleeping on a couch and living out of a tote bag. The overlap was precise. Not close, not almost, exact. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to, not because I was shocked, but because something inside me was settling into place, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding in without resistance. I scrolled back. More appointments, more overlaps, different excuses, same timing, different words, same outcome. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse. It wasn't a night that went too far. It was a structure, built carefully, maintained consistently, protected by my trust. That was the moment the question changed. I stopped asking if something was happening. I started understanding how long it had been happening without me. The realization didn't hurt the way people describe betrayal hurting. There was no sharp break, no collapse. It was quieter than that. Like discovering a building had been condemned long before you moved in. Betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives finished. Lauren was never just my sister. She was the person I learned to protect before I learned how to protect myself. We grew up 4 years apart, close enough that our lives overlapped, far enough that responsibility fell naturally into my hands. When our parents argued, she came to my room. When she failed her first exam in college, she called me, not them. When her first serious relationship collapsed, she slept on my couch for 3 nights, crying quietly into a pillow I still owned years later. I paid for textbooks when her scholarships ran thin. I covered rent once when her hours were cut, and she swore it was temporary. I answered late-night calls, talked her through panic attacks, defended her when others called her reckless. I had always believed that was what older sisters did. Protection didn't feel like a burden back then. It felt like love. That's why the betrayal landed the way it did. Not as a single act, but as a complete inversion of everything I thought we were. This wasn't a stranger crossing a line. It wasn't a temptation that got out of control. It was domestic, familiar, built inside the walls I had helped hold up. Every shared holiday, every borrowed sweater, every time she sat at my table and ate the food I cooked carried a different weight now. The asymmetry became impossible to ignore. I had protected her in moments of weakness. She had chosen me as collateral in moments of desire. That difference mattered, because betrayal between family isn't just about trust. It's about access. She knew my schedule, my absences, my blind spots. She knew how much I hated confrontation, how easily I gave people the benefit of the doubt. She knew exactly where I would never think to look, and she used all of it. Understanding that cost me something I didn't realize I'd been holding on to. Not my marriage. That was already failing its own audit. What it cost me was the version of family I thought was immune to damage. So I withdrew, not emotionally, at least not yet, strategically. I stopped offering explanations. I stopped filling silences. I didn't ask questions that would force lies into the open before I was ready to hear them. I let phone calls ring longer. I delayed responses. I allowed space to form without announcing it. From the outside, nothing looked different. Inside, everything had shifted. Because when betrayal comes from family, confrontation isn't always the first act of strength. Sometimes silence becomes self-defense. Silence unsettles people who are hiding something. Matthew felt it almost immediately. He started apologizing without apologizing. Vague phrases, carefully chosen. I know I've been distant. Work's been overwhelming lately. I feel like I haven't been present. He spoke in generalities, circling the problem without ever naming it, as if precision itself might incriminate him. Stress became the explanation for everything. Long hours, pressure, expectations. He talked about being tired, the way people talk when they want sympathy without scrutiny. And I let him. I nodded at the right moments. I kept my tone even. I didn't ask the follow-up questions that would have forced him to commit to a lie. That restraint gave him confidence. Lauren's message came the next day. It started with an apology that didn't quite apologize. I feel like things have been weird between us. Then a compliment, then concern, then a question disguised as care. Are you okay? You seem distant. I just want to make sure you're not upset with me. The pattern was familiar. Soft words layered over inspection. Comfort paired with monitoring. I answered both of them the same way. One sentence, neutral, emotionless. I won't do anything reckless. Don't worry. I didn't send it to start a conversation. I sent it to end one. The effect was immediate. Matthew relaxed too quickly. The relief showed in his shoulders, in the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. Later that evening, he filled the silence with plans. Future talk, repair language. He behaved like a man who believed the worst had passed. Lauren reacted differently. Her confidence didn't return. It fractured. Her messages grew shorter, then more frequent. She checked in under different pretenses. Family logistics, small favors, casual questions that weren't casual at all. She was trying to read between the lines, trying to locate the threat she could feel but not see. That's when the power shifted, because they both believed I had chosen forgiveness. They mistook calm for closure. They assumed my silence meant fear or confusion or weakness. What they didn't understand was that forgiveness hadn't been offered. Access had. By staying composed, by not confronting, by allowing them to believe the narrative they needed. I kept the doors open. I stayed inside the system instead of being expelled from it. I remained close enough to observe without resistance. And that proximity did something dangerous. It made them careless. Panic doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like relief too early. Sometimes it looks like overconfidence. Sometimes it shows up as unnecessary reassurance, repeated one time too many. They were no longer defending themselves. They were waiting for a reaction that never came. Forgiveness wasn't mercy. It was access. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and overripe fruit. It was late afternoon. Grocery carts rattled. A child cried somewhere near the entrance. Nothing about the place suggested that anything irreversible was about to happen. which is exactly why she had chosen it. Public enough to feel safe, ordinary enough to feel invisible. Lauren arrived late. Her car slid into the space beside mine and stopped too close, as if proximity might soften what she was about to say. She stepped out slowly, shoulders already rounded, face arranged into something fragile. She didn't look at me at first. She didn't have to. She already knew why we were there. "I'm so glad you came," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. That was the buildup, the posture, the tone, the assumption that emotion could still negotiate. She cried quickly, efficiently, tears without buildup, the kind you summon when you know you're losing control of the story. She talked in fragments, about pressure, about confusion, about how nothing was supposed to happen this way. She apologized without naming what she was apologizing for. She explained without explaining anything. I didn't interrupt. I didn't reassure her. I let the silence widen until she felt it. That's when the slip happened. She pressed a hand to her stomach without realizing it. Not protectively, instinctively. A gesture too practiced to be accidental. Her words kept moving, but her body had already said what her mouth hadn't caught up to yet. I looked at her hand. She noticed. Her voice faltered. She inhaled sharply, like someone who had missed a step on a staircase and realized too late there was no railing. "I didn't plan this," she said quickly. Too quickly. I didn't even know at first. There it was. Not a confession, a fact, dropped carelessly into the open. Pregnant. The word didn't echo. It didn't ring. It landed flat and heavy, like something that had been waiting to be placed. Something ruptured then. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. She kept talking, panic now overtaking performance. She reframed, minimized, reached for familiar roles. Little sister, victim, someone overwhelmed. She said his name like it might absolve her. She said mine like it might soften me. And then she crossed the line. He needed someone who wasn't always tired. The sentence came out clean. Practiced, sharp, not angry, not defensive, just honest. It was the kind of honesty that reveals more than intended. Not a mistake, a belief. In that moment, I saw her clearly. Not as my sister, not as someone who had made a terrible choice, but as someone who had made a calculation and stood by it. Someone who had weighed my exhaustion, my absence, my trust, and decided they were acceptable losses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. Because there was nothing left to clarify. That sentence severed the last thread connecting us to anything salvageable.
Of identity, and now the current carries you smoothly, without noise, without friction, without fear. Reality feels alive in a way it never did before. You can sense the consciousness in every object, in walls, in trees, in the wind that brushes your skin. Everything breathes with you, because it's all part of the same organism. The illusion of separation is gone, and in its absence, love expands without boundaries. You begin to realize that love is not an emotion, it's structure. It's what holds existence together. It's the magnetic intelligence organizing atoms, aligning galaxies, and keeping your heart beating at the same rhythm as the stars. It's what abundance has always been. The fundamental generosity of reality itself. When you truly feel that, you stop praying for blessings and start living as the blessing. You stop waiting for miracles and start recognizing that you are the miracle. The field no longer feels external. It's not something you connect to, it's the essence of what you are. Every choice you make now is guided, not by thought, but by resonance. If it expands you, it's truth. If it contracts you, it's memory. That's how simple alignment becomes. No more confusion, no more struggle. only clarity disguised as intuition, only motion that feels like music. Time, too, changes flavor. Moments stretch and fold. You might glance at the clock and realize hours have passed, or notice that entire days feel like seconds. Because when you live in coherence, you're no longer bound by linear time. You're moving through eternity, one breath at a time. You may notice that the people around you begin to shift as well. Some drift away peacefully. Others awaken just by being near you. Your presence becomes a catalyst. You no longer teach with words, you teach with frequency. And those who are ready recognize it instantly. They feel lighter around you, not because you gave them anything, but because your energy gave them permission to remember themselves. This is the silent service of the awakened manifester. To live so fully aligned that others rediscover their own alignment in your presence, not by preaching, but by being, not by convincing, but by radiating. And yet, even here, humility deepens. You realize how little you ever did, how the ego that thought it was manifesting was simply part of a larger intelligence, learning to move through form. You laugh, softly, gratefully, at the beautiful simplicity of it all. It was never about effort, never about control. It was always about remembering the eternal truth. You are the consciousness of abundance itself, momentarily disguised as a human learning to feel again. The air feels sacred now, every sound a mantra, every silence a sermon. You look around and see nothing ordinary. Even the smallest detail, the flicker of a candle, the ripple of water, the eyes of a stranger, feels like the universe winking back.
Once emotion steps out of the room, clarity moves in. That's when the work begins. I didn't cry after the parking lot. I didn't pace. I didn't replay her words. I treated the moment the way I treat the first abnormal reading in a report. Noted, contained, set aside for later correlation. Then, I opened my laptop. I started with a scan. Broad, unemotional, comprehensive. Bank statements from the joint account Matthew and I had shared for years. Nothing dramatic at first glance. Groceries, utilities, mortgage, normal life rendered in numbers. I wasn't looking for outrage. I was looking for repetition. Patterns always betray themselves. The transfers appeared quietly, small enough to avoid attention, consistent enough to matter. Same amount, same interval, always midweek, always timed to days. I was working late or traveling for conferences. Not random, scheduled. I flagged them and moved on. Credit card statements came next. Hotels I had never stayed in. Reservations under familiar cities at unfamiliar times. Charges that didn't align with any story he'd ever told me. The data didn't argue. It didn't justify. It simply existed. Then came the medical payments. 2 clinics. Reputable. Specialized. Not the kind of places you accidentally visit. The amounts were precise. The dates aligned with the transfers. I didn't need to speculate. I understood exactly what kind of care those facilities provided. I added them to the timeline. This wasn't about proving betrayal. That had already been established. This was about defining its shape. I moved deeper into the audit. Email archives, cloud storage, forgotten folders people assume no one will ever check. Matthew had always been careless with digital housekeeping. He believed privacy was a matter of intent, not discipline. That belief cost him. The email wasn't hidden. It wasn't encrypted. It sat unremarkably in an old thread marked follow-up. A confirmation from the clinic. 2 attendees listed, Matthew Carter, Lauren Carter. I read it once, then again, not because I doubted it, but because accuracy matters. The date matched the transfer. The appointment time matched the calendar entry. The dentist appointment slid neatly into place as what it had always been: camouflage. The timeline closed, not emotionally, structurally. Every question I could have asked was already answered by the data. The affair, the pregnancy, the coordination, the duration. There were no gaps left for denial to hide in. At some point, I noticed my breathing had slowed. My shoulders were no longer tense. My thoughts moved cleanly, without interference. This was the state I recognized, the one where instinct and training align. People assume clarity feels like anger refined. It doesn't. It feels like quiet competence. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't rehearsing confrontations. I wasn't imagining reactions. Those are distractions. They belong to the emotional phase, and that phase was over. This was precision work now. I documented everything: screenshots, PDFs, dates cross-referenced, copies stored in places that didn't rely on trust or shared access. I worked methodically, the way you do when you know this material may need to stand on its own one day. When I closed the laptop, it wasn't because I was exhausted. It was because there was nothing left to find. That was when the shift completed. The story was no longer theirs to control. Not through charm, not through excuses, not through tears or threats. The truth had been reduced to a structure that could not be bent. I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. I didn't change overnight. That was the first thing that made them believe me. I stayed measured, predictable. I laughed in the same places. I kept the same routines. I didn't withdraw affection abruptly or offer it excessively. I found the balance people trust, the version of calm that feels like acceptance, not calculation. Matthew responded immediately. Relief softened him. He filled the space I gave him with optimism, with talk about moving forward, about how families go through seasons. He wanted to believe that whatever tension he sensed had passed. He needed it to have passed. Lauren took longer. Her warmth returned in cautious increments. A friendly message, a shared memory, a question about our parents, phrased gently enough to sound concerned rather than investigative. She watched for inconsistencies, for emotional spikes, for signs that I might fracture. I gave her none. When I finally spoke about peace, I did it casually, not as a declaration, as a suggestion. Let's keep the family intact, I said one evening, as if the thought had only just occurred to me. I don't want our parents dragged into something they can't undo. The words landed exactly where they needed to. Matthew nodded too quickly. Lauren exhaled on the other end of the phone. I could hear the shift in both of them, the recalibration from defense to relief. I let that relief settle. Then I offered the invitation. Our anniversary was coming up. 8 years. A number that sounded stable, respectable. I suggested a small family dinner at my parents' house. Nothing elaborate, no speeches, just food, familiar faces, and the comfort of tradition. It might be good, I said, for everyone. Matthew liked the idea immediately. He framed it as healing, as proof that we were moving past something unnamed but understood. He talked about making things right, about how much our parents would appreciate seeing us together. Lauren hesitated, just briefly. Then she agreed. That hesitation mattered more than her consent. It told me she was still afraid, but not afraid enough to refuse. Fear loses its edge when it isn't fed. From that moment on, they relaxed. Matthew stopped watching his phone so closely. He let conversations drift. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the danger had passed. He assumed the future had reopened. Lauren made the mistake of returning to normal. She joked again. She slipped into old habits. She stopped checking my tone for hidden meaning. The tension that had sharpened her movements dulled. She believed the risk had been contained. They both mistook consistency for sincerity. They didn't understand that calm isn't the absence of intent, it's the discipline to delay it. I continued preparing in ways they never saw, quietly, separately. I didn't rehearse outcomes or imagine reactions. I focused on alignment, making sure every piece would exist exactly where it belonged, untouched by emotion. On the surface, I was conciliatory. Underneath, everything was set. By the time the dinner approached, they weren't bracing for anything. They were relieved. They were hopeful. They believed they had navigated the danger without consequence. They believed I had chosen peace. What they didn't realize was that peace doesn't always mean protection. Sometimes it means timing. They mistook calm for surrender. The house looked exactly the way it always had. Same curtains, same framed photos, same familiar weight of history, pressing softly into every corner. The table was set carefully, nothing extravagant. Plates aligned, glasses polished, food arranged the way my mother always preferred. Balanced, intentional, comforting. No one walked in expecting a reckoning. They sat down, believing this was reconciliation. I waited until everyone was present, until conversations had settled into their predictable rhythms, until laughter appeared in the places it always did. When the moment came, I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't announce anything. I simply began. I want to clarify something, I said calmly, so no one has to wonder later. That was my testimony. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing outward. I didn't slide it toward anyone. I didn't ask them to look. I let it exist. The message was visible, the date, the time, the sender. No commentary. Then I opened a folder. Printed pages, clean copies, bank statements, transfers highlighted lightly, not aggressively, dates aligned, amounts consistent. The kind of documentation people recognize immediately, even if they don't want to. I explained what each document was, not what it meant. This is our joint account. These are recurring transfers. These are clinic payments. I didn't say why. I didn't have to. The burden shifted without resistance. My father leaned forward. My mother stopped mid-motion, hand still hovering near her glass. Matthew stared at the table, not at the pages. Lauren's breathing changed. Shorter, shallower. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Then I added the final piece, the DNA result. No flourish, no pause, just placement. A single page, black text on white paper. A percentage that didn't require interpretation. A name that didn't need repeating. The room absorbed it. I stepped back, not physically, but deliberately. I stopped explaining. I stopped narrating. I let the truth occupy the space I had cleared for it. That's when the reckoning began. Questions weren't directed at me. They didn't need to be. Eyes moved where they needed to move. Silence settled into something heavier than accusation. My mother's voice trembled, not with anger, but with disbelief. My father didn't raise his voice at all. He didn't need to. Matthew tried once. A sentence started, then stalled. He had nothing to anchor it to. No story left that hadn't already collapsed under its own contradictions. Lauren stared at the table, at the documents, at her hands. She said my name once, softly, as if it might change something. It didn't. I didn't respond. That was the most important part, because the truth had finished speaking. Anything I added would only dilute it. I watched as the weight transferred, off my shoulders, onto theirs, where it had always belonged. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just alignment, the quiet relief that comes when responsibility is returned to its rightful place. By the end of the evening, nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting, no scenes, just the irreversible shift of how everyone in that room now understood what had been done, and by whom. The silence lingered long after the plates were cleared, and it punished far more effectively than anger ever could. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded the way real things do, quietly, inevitably, without needing my involvement. Matthew's career didn't collapse in a dramatic public way. There were no announcements, no scenes, just meetings that ended differently than before, calls that stopped coming, a position that quietly dissolved under organizational changes. When a reputation is built on trust, it doesn't survive prolonged silence or unanswered questions. I didn't have to say a word. Lauren's loss was slower. Family trust doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. Invitations stop arriving. Conversations become careful. People listen more than they speak. The warmth she once relied on cooled into distance she couldn't argue with. No one needed to take sides. Understanding had already done the work. As for me, I packed my life the way I approach everything else, deliberately. I moved through the house room by room, not rushed, not sentimental. I kept what was mine: clothes, books, notes from conferences, objects tied to effort, not endurance. When I reached the box of inherited photos, I paused, generations smiling into cameras, unaware of the lines that would be crossed decades later. I left them behind, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Some things belong to a version of family that no longer exists. Carrying them would have meant carrying the silence that came with them. I took nothing that bound me to what I had outgrown. The new apartment was smaller, quieter, just enough space for intention. No extra rooms filled with expectation. No furniture chosen to accommodate compromise. The first night I slept there, the silence felt different. Not empty, earned. I noticed how easily I breathed. I wasn't rebuilding myself. I hadn't been broken. That realization surprised me. Betrayal hadn't destroyed my sense of self. It had stripped away the parts of my life that required me to explain, justify, or endure. What remained was lighter, cleaner, more honest. Boundaries stopped feeling like defenses and started feeling like architecture. I learned where I ended and where others began. I learned that loyalty without reciprocity is not virtue, it's erosion. I learned that staying calm doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means choosing the right moment to speak and knowing when not to. Most of all, I learned that peace doesn't announce itself. It settles. I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave triumphant. I left aligned with my work, with my values, with the life I wanted to inhabit moving forward. Some betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who knew exactly where it would hurt most. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to confront them loudly, but to step away quietly, carrying only what still belongs to you. I'd really love to know where in the world this story has reached. Please leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories from me.